In 1992, Richard Garriott from Origin Systems released a game that would quietly reshape the future of RPGs for generations. Ultima VII: The Black Gate, a revolutionary title that pushed the boundaries of what the virtual world could be. In Ultima VII, almost anything not nailed down could be picked up, stacked, moved, cooked, or stolen. It was a game where systems mattered, where freedom ruled, where players weren't just going through levels, but living in a world, interacting with it. Paired with Ultima Underworld, these games laid the foundation for what we now call the immersive sim. Worlds built on systems, physics, and emergent gameplay through player-driven solutions. A philosophy later cemented in games like System Shock and Deus Ex. For gamers in the early 90s, this kind of freedom felt almost unreal. It was the kind of agency most players only knew from tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons. They inspired a generation. Todd Howard and the original creators carried that philosophy into the Elder Scrolls. Ken Levine brought it into BioShock, Rafael Colantonio into Arx Fatalis. But between 1996 and 1997, in a tiny electronics shop in Ghent, Belgium, a place with no windows and desks literally held up by Coca-Cola boxes, another mind was being shaped by the Ultima series. A young, aspiring gamer and developer named Swen Vincke, founder of Larian Studios. He formed a dream, an ambition that, by every rule of the industry, should have ended in failure. A journey that pushed his studio to the brink of bankruptcy not once, not twice, but 10 different times. And yet, against all odds, became one of the most beloved RPG developers in the gaming world.
I have multiple ambitions for the studio. The end goal is to make this very big RPG that will dwarf them all, is what I call it. It's a bit of a joke, but it's true also. I want to make a very, very big RPG.
Throughout the late 90s, the RPG landscape was shifting. The world interactivity Ultima had pioneered was fading. JRPGs were rising in popularity, and in the West, series like The Elder Scrolls and Fallout carried some of that systemic spirit, but by 1996, Diablo changed the landscape, introducing the fast-paced action RPG subgenre that would dominate the genre for years. Then came Baldur's Gate and Planescape Torment, with its strategic, party-based combat, branching dialogue, and narrative reactivity. Despite these evolutions, their worlds remained mostly static. Swen and Larian sought to carry the torch of Ultima, the freedom of pen and paper role-playing, rooted in two core principles: exploration and systemic interaction, where emergent gameplay wasn't scripted, but discovered.
But other than that, it was just a sheer sense of reward for exploration. I picked that up from that game. I said that this is one of the games that rewards exploration so much through systemics, through systemic interaction with the world, because you had to put your little crates next to one another and climb on top of it to get through things, and like there were secrets everywhere. I loved it, and it's heavily defined how I think RPGs should make, because I want to get that same feeling from our own games.
So he and a small group of friends, barely even a company yet, scraped together enough money to attend the 1996 ECTS trade show in London. Their goal was simple: get someone, anyone, to believe in their ambitious RPG project. Ragnarok Unless, the greatest game title ever conceived. Despite how primitive the project was, it caught the attention of a giant, Atari, offering them a $50,000 contract. For a handful of young developers, the validation must have felt like their moment, their dream finally seemed possible. But instead, this is where the curse of Larian Studios really began. That very same year, Atari was collapsing. The Jaguar and Lynx consoles had failed spectacularly. Revenue was drying up, and the company merged with a hard drive manufacturer, JTS, effectively stripping away Atari's game development arm. And just like that, the deal evaporated. But Swen wasn't about to let that kill their momentum. With just 4 developers, Larian pushed forward. The game evolved, grew, morphed into something more ambitious. A new RPG called The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight. Set on a swampy island dominated by a towering mage citadel, the game would let players control all 3 protagonists, each with their own role, and even allowing friends to control the other characters. The game would also have a high level of world interaction, such as sleeping, eating, or interacting with objects. High level of inter-NPC communication, forming a groundbreaking AI system and realistic world. But that ambition came with a cost. With finances running razor thin, Larian faced their first bankruptcy scare, resorting to loans and other extremes.
Alright, and the Coke bottles that you're seeing there, that was the Larian secret. Since 1997, we had these big boxes of Coke on which we put our tables, and whenever we were out of money, we went with the Coke boxes, then we didn't have any tables anymore, but we got some more money, and then we reinvested it in Coke, and like this. It went on.
The ideas behind LMK were huge. The team's experience very much wasn't. For publishers, it was simply too risky to take on the project. If Larian wanted to survive long enough to finish their first RPG, they needed something more practical, something they could deliver quickly and actually get paid for. So along with LMK came a smaller project, a futuristic RTS. In just 6 months, and with a small publishing deal from Ionos, they built Lead Wars. It wasn't a revolutionary title, and it didn't top the charts, but it did review well, and it did have something amazing. In order to cut costs, Lead Wars presented its missions with live-action cutscenes, including Swen himself playing Professor Deep.
My name is Professor Deep. I am the leader of the Purple Partisan movement. You have never heard of us before, but soon our name will be all over your monitors.
But Lead Wars gave Larian something far more important than sales. Proof. Proof they could ship a game. Proof they had the discipline to finish one. Proof they were an actual game studio. That fragile stability arrived just in time, because in a rare stroke of luck, as Lead Wars was signed by Ionos, a German publisher stepped forward. Attic Entertainment agreed to take on The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight.
With bravery, wisdom, and grace, they took up this losing battle against black magic, against beings from hell, against strange natural forces.
Early tech demos showed promise. For its time, the game looked surprisingly impressive, and the Ultima VII influences were unmistakable. But just as everything seemed to be moving forward, the publisher's problems returned. Being an indie developer in the 90s was awfully brutal. Games had to be physically boxed, marketed, and shipped to store shelves. And while Larian Studios was independent in spirit and quite active in the early days of the internet, they couldn't survive without publishers. Contracts were the only way to keep the lights on, and Larian's deals were rarely in their favor. As in many such cases, publishers often get in the way of the creative vision. For The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight, their publisher, Attic, began pushing their own goals onto the project. Attic held the rights to the Dark Eye, Germany's equivalent to Dungeons & Dragons, and served as the publisher and developer of the popular RPG trilogy Realms of Arcania. Going forward, LMK was now to be part of the Dark Eye universe, completely reshaping the project. And if that wasn't enough, Attic wanted the game redesigned to resemble the rising star of the RPG world, Diablo. Diablo 2 had just been shown, and Attic insisted that LMK should transition to 16-bit just to compete with the giant. This meant every asset had to be redone. They bet so massively, German magazines began hyping LMK as the future Diablo killer. But Diablo wasn't the only competition. By 1998, BioWare was preparing to launch Baldur's Gate, their first major RPG, and a project that, on paper, mirrored Larian's ambitions. Two young studios, two first attempts at big RPGs. Seeing the similarities, a fan actually tried to put the two studios in touch, hoping to spark a collaboration between what could have become two titans of the genre. But Attic intervened. Out of fear that BioWare might learn their trade secrets, they stepped in and soured the relationship before it could even begin. According to Swen, it was a real pity. And yet, despite all the setbacks, all the challenges, Swen continued to share his ambitions publicly. On the short term, I want to build Larian Studios into a powerful game developer. I do have a very clear main goal, but it requires a lot of money to pull it off. So until that time, I will devote myself to generating money by having fun. And so, the fun of developing games kept going, but as development dragged on, Attic's funding began drying up. Month after month, payroll didn't arrive. The direction change had pushed the project beyond its capabilities, and now the money was disappearing too. Despite Larian producing a cinematic trailer shown at E3, news around the game slowly became sparse. Online forums began filling with angry posts asking if the strange Belgians behind LMK even existed anymore. And the thing is, they weren't entirely wrong. Years later on the Larian forums, Swen published a thread called "The Truth About LMK." He posted an email chain showing just how chaotic Attic's management was. Every month was a battle just to survive. Eventually, Attic went bankrupt, and Swen finally pulled the plug. The game that was supposed to rival Diablo, the project that aimed to stand alongside BioWare's Baldur's Gate, by 1999, it was gone.
So when the money didn't come in anymore, it was like, oh, we have a problem. I don't think there was cash to pay the next month. I had let it last way too long because I kept on hoping, because here was my baby about to die. We were literally 1 month away from closing. So I couldn't make payroll at the end of the month. And so that created quite a stressful situation. And that was essentially what led to the end of the late Mage and The Knight. I pulled the plug on it at some point because I had 30 people here and I couldn't pay them.
Their second bankruptcy scare loomed at the door, so Swen enacted a survival plan. Larian turned to work for hire. They built more than 20 small web gambling games, primarily for online casinos. Quick, cheap projects that paid just enough to keep the lights on. It wasn't what they dreamed of, but it bought them time. By August 1999, they began building something new, using what remains of LMK as the foundation, the first entry in what would become their defining franchise, Divinity, the Sword of Lies. They secured a publishing deal with another German company, CDV, who insisted on changing the title to something truly special, Divine Divinity.
And on the third day, all hell broke loose.
To sell the idea, Swen pitched the game as a crossroads between the two biggest RPG forces at the time, Diablo for the combat and interface, Baldur's Gate for the narrative and NPC interaction. And just by looking at early gameplay, you can see both influences clearly, but beneath that, the heart of Ultima VII still beats strongly, a highly interactive, non-linear open world to explore, and emergent gameplay. And woven through all of it was something uncommon in RPGs at the time, Larian's signature sense of odd, playful humor.
Hey, look, it stands to reason you can't eat because you don't have a stomach.
Aha, so how can we speak? We don't have no vocal cords either. Answer that, Mr. Clever.
Yeah, you're right, you know. I mean, if you think about it, we don't have no muscles or flesh on our bones either. So, what keeps us together, sort of thing, huh?
Best not to think about it. I don't want to fall to bits because of excess existential thought.
By 2002, Divine Divinity was finally ready, or at least as ready as it could be. This was meant to be Larian's first real commercial RPG, their chance to prove themselves, but as Sven later explained, the game wasn't ready when it was released. We didn't even know that the publisher was releasing it. We were horribly late with it, at least by a year. But we still needed some time to polish it, so it shipped with 7,000 known bugs, and the initial reviews obviously focused on them. But as we started tweaking it, people started seeing that it was a good game. Despite everything, the bugs, the rushed release, the chaotic development, reviewers praised its ambition, a flawed gem, selling well for an RPG from a small studio. But in classic Larian fashion, their deal with CDV was not ideal. During development, the studio had 2 more bankruptcy scares in 2001 and 2002, and their contract with CDV was structured as a royalty-only deal, meaning unless Divine Divinity sold millions, Larian would barely see any money at all. 5 months after launch, despite the success, Larian was nearing bankruptcy for the 5th time. The 30-person studio shrank down to just 3 developers.
Right, and there you were looking like no money coming in, critical success everywhere, an empty studio, and it's very hard time. I almost cracked in, but I didn't.
Through a mix of loans, more work-for-hire casino projects, and a deal with a Belgian broadcaster, Catnet Kick, effectively producing small games for kids on a contest show on TV, they scraped together enough funding to begin a Divinity sequel, Beyond Divinity. Slowly, the studio began to grow again, reaching around 25 people, but Divine Divinity had revealed something important. Publishers could be predatory, and relying on them was dangerous. So Sven changed tactics. Instead of signing with a publisher, he sought a distribution deal. A model where distributors, in this case Ubisoft, purchased a set number of copies upfront, providing funding without gaining creative control. Released in 2004, Beyond Divinity arrived with yet familiar problems. Bugs, missing polish, and a compromised vision. It did introduce what would become another future Larian staple, 2 playable characters sharing the narrative, but reviews were weaker than the original. The ideas were there, but the game felt like it was made out of necessity, something built to keep the studio afloat rather than push the genre forward, which was exactly the case. And visually, it was already outdated. In just 2 short years, the RPG world would be transformed by Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion and a new generation of consoles. If Larian wanted to survive, they had to evolve, and fast.
So we had obviously fallen again in the trap of this fantastic triangle, which most people in development know. It's time, budget, quality. It's something that if you can never have all of them staying constant. So either you have to move the time if you don't want to move budget and quality, either you have to move the quality if you don't want to move time and budget, or either you have to change the budget if you don't want to change time and quality. And so the big problem that we always had was that we didn't have enough money, we didn't have enough time, but we always wanted more quality. We were always very ambitious about how we were going to make our games. So this was a very, very big problem for us.
Quality was always at the heart of Larian. So was the dream to one day build a massive, fully fledged AAA RPG. But the cards still weren't falling in their favor. Work-for-hire projects continued, and slowly, piece by piece, they gathered enough funds to begin Divinity 2 around 2006. Instead of developing another version of their own engine, Larian approached Bethesda about licensing their famed Gamebyro engine. But the past haunted them. According to developers, many people simply refused to work at Larian due to the studio's history of layoffs and near bankruptcies. And as always, the team aimed high. Very high. Divinity 2 wouldn't just be a third-person open-world RPG, it would let players transform into a dragon. Literally. A huge concept, a massive technical challenge. The question was, could they actually pull it off?
What happens when a dragon slayer becomes a dragon?
By 2007, even with new funding, Larian faced yet another bankruptcy scare. Their ambitions had outgrown their resources, and the production values they were chasing demanded real money. So, they began seeking a publisher to support the entire vision.
Hi, my name is Sven. I will be presenting you Divinity 2 Ego Draconis on Xbox 360.
Hi John, I'm going to give you an overview of what we've done in the last month.
Hi John, this is Milestone 3, the Broken Valley 2 vertical slice. Every single thing which you see on the screen has been redone.
Most turned them down, except for two smaller companies, CDV returning once again, and DTP Entertainment, who agreed to co-fund the project. The money was there, but the interference came with it. Elements Larian considered essential, complex quests, emergent systems, branching narrative, were seen by publishers as unnecessary luxuries. And worst of all, DTP began facing financial problems of their own. The crisis hit fast. Divinity 2 had to ship now. The team needed time to fix bugs, refine systems, and polish the dragon gameplay, but there was no time left. When Divinity 2 launched in 2009, it became the worst-rated game Larian had ever released. A bold, unique vision, weighted down by bugs, cut features, and that familiar crushing sense of unfulfilled vision, marking their 7th near bankruptcy. We've pretty much lost everything that we have built up financially over the years. Half of my team is looking to go work for EA or Activision. We are not getting paid at all from the publisher. My wife doesn't want to talk to me anymore, and she wants to move. I'm a physical wreck, and a doctor tells me I have to take another job. So there we are, 2009. A year later, the improved version Dragon Knight Saga proved they could make a good game, a third-person game with a grand vision. But the damage had already been done. After years of publisher collapses, meddling, forced releases, and endless near bankruptcies, when truth became impossible to ignore, the publisher route was killing Larian Studios. Enough was enough. If Larian wanted to survive, to break the curse, they needed to be in control of their budget, their quality, and their time. We need to be in control of ourselves. We don't work with other people because we iterate too much. We want to change it because we like what we are playing. If it doesn't feel right, we change it. It's why we are always late with everything that we do. When you go to a game convention, it was all about how to better project manage, how to check your boxes. The only words that were not mentioned in all of those talks were the games. That just did not work, because we did it out of passion. And so, Larian needed to become something they had never been before, fully independent.
The best approach I've learned is that you try to have fun as you make it, and then hopefully that fun is going to brush off on the player. He's going to have fun too. And you do your best. What more can you do?
Fume. While pitching the original Divinity, Sven developed a framework, a way to evaluate whether an RPG had the qualities he cared most about. He called it Fume. F for freedom of character development, U, universe in which your character grows, M, motivation and driving that growth, E, enemies you face along the way. Games like Ultima VII and the original Fallout scored incredibly high on Sven's Fume scale, but his own games and modern RPGs in general, they still weren't hitting the mark, and Sven, he wanted to change that. In 2010, he laid out a new plan for Larian's future. Work for hire would continue, but they would also start gathering funding from venture capitalists, leveraging their past titles as proof they could deliver. And out of these parallel efforts came two internal prototypes, Project D and Project E. Project D would eventually become
Divinity, Dragon Commander. Command massive armies. Become the dragon. Master the art of war. Forge an empire.
a bizarre, wonderful, unique hybrid. Dragon combat, RTS strategy, role-playing decisions, political satire. A strange mix, yet beloved by a niche audience. Released in 2013, it was Larian's first self-published game. Sales weren't incredible, but the game broke even, which mattered more than anything after two more bankruptcy scares in 2010 and 2011. Along with additional loans and mortgages, piling on more debt just to keep the studio alive. So during development, a decision was made. Project E, originally intended to be a smaller indie title in classic Larian fashion, pivoted to something much larger. All remaining resources, even some from Dragon Commander, were funneled into this single effort, a project that was to bring back Sven's original goal, to make a game that would recreate the feeling he felt when playing Ultima VII, a feeling he still hadn't truly captured. A world with the freedom of pen and paper RPGs, a world built on systemic interactivity, a true party-based adventure driven by player choice, a project that would either save Larian Studios or finally break it. Divinity: Original Sin.
It's very much a back to the roots game. It's a top-down RPG, and it takes place just before the first Divinity, the game that started the entire series.
On May 29th, 2012, Larian finally unveils the game to the world, a true return to the roots of Divinity, a return to two playable characters, fully playable in multiplayer, an in-house engine called Divinity Engine, a return to the top-down viewpoint. But at this time, Larian embraced something they had always wanted to do: turn-based combat, a world built on high interactivity, not just from objects you could pick up, move or stack, but from exploration and the environment itself, chaining abilities, setting the ground on fire, freezing enemies, electrifying water, abusing elemental reactions, and most importantly, no hand-holding, letting players build their own adventure. RPG players responded instantly. The reaction from its E3 showing was overwhelmingly positive. At the time, the RPG landscape was shifting once again. Giants like BioWare, now under EA, were becoming increasingly streamlined, broad, and mainstream. The classic RPG roots were quietly fading from the industry. So seeing a game that felt both new and classic, both innovative and nostalgic, hit RPG fans like a breath of fresh air. It felt like someone was finally carrying the torch again. And the timing couldn't have been better. Around this era, crowdfunding was growing increasingly popular among indies, reviving old-school legends through community support. Wasteland 2, Shadowrun returns, Torment, Tides of Numenera. The revival of CRPGs was underway. On March 27, 2013, Larian made one of the most important decisions in their entire history.
So why did we decide to come to Kickstarter? Well, in one phrase, we want to increase the development budget of the game. You see, if you look at what we've created so far, you'll find a pretty good RPG. Actually, in my opinion, this is probably the best RPG we've ever created. However, there's these little things missing from the gameplay that, if they were present, would make this RPG a really great RPG. Actually, there's quite a few things we would like to add.
If any studio belonged on Kickstarter, it was Larian Studios. The game was already deep in development, far beyond a typical proof of concept. But crowdfunding would finally give them the time and the budget to expand, to reach the quality they were dreaming of. Larian pitched the idea simply: picture a modern version of a world not unlike that of Ultima VII, that can be explored either alone or with a friend, that sees you engage adversaries in tactical turn-based combat, reminiscent of the great turn-based RPGs of the past. The goal was $400,000, a relatively modest target. After all, most of the game was done. The Kickstarter was meant to fund the polish, the reactivity, the branching quests, the puzzles, the NPC depth, new areas, and more if they hit beyond stretch goals.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we did it. Thanks to you, our Kickstarter campaign was successfully funded in less than a fortnight.
And they did more than hit the goal.
I feel it's got an awful lot of promise. It seems to have a well-realized world and interesting combat system, plenty of old-school CRPG mechanics and tropes that are really attractive to me.
Guy contacted me, he's like, oh, Joe, I saw that you backed our project. Do you want to try out the game?
Guys, here's what's gonna happen. Dodger, get in here! Take a note!
Nearly $1 million raised, almost 20,000 backers. They finally had what Divine Divinity, Beyond Divinity, and Divinity 2 never truly had, a chance to finish a game properly. The release date was set for November 2013. But November came and the game still wasn't ready.
We decided that it was better to integrate everything the way that we should be integrating it and finish the job decently rather than rush it to market like we had to do a few times in the past.
So the date shifted to February 2014. And no, not even close. The budget was ballooning at a terrifying rate, from the initial 1 million euros to 3 million euros to an eventual 4.5 million euros. Despite everything, Kickstarter, loans, careful planning, even investors, Larian was running out of money again.
I basically signed the last thing that I could sign to get some money to do it, and then we were on the blacklist of the VAT, and there was this bank that wanted to close us, and all these things going on. So.
It was all or nothing.
Budget can just go wherever it wants to go. We're not going to cheat on the quality, and we will let time take its course, so as much time as it takes. So it was all in for the company. Every single thing, down to my house, to my mortgage, everything that I had went into Original Sin.
Everything Larian had built so far was on the line. By January 2014, Larian made a crucial move. Divinity Original Sin launched in Steam Early Access, giving them a much-needed revenue stream. Just like Kickstarter, Early Access had become a lifeline for ambitious indie projects, and Larian was a perfect example of how vital that lifeline could be.
It's been a fantastic journey. It's been an incredible journey. When we started making Original Sin, we had hopes and aspirations, but we never thought that we were going to be making the game that shipped today, especially when you looked at the budget that we had, which was ridiculous actually for the type of game that we released today. It is just fantastic, and that obviously is because of all of you.
Then finally, June 30th, 2014, after years of false starts, collapses, reinventions, and near-death moments, Divinity Original Sin was ready. A very positive rating on Steam, an 8.5 on Metacritic, and by September 2014, over 500,000 copies were sold. It became Larian's most successful launch ever. This momentum allowed them to go back and create an enhanced edition, polishing rough edges, reworking the story, refining systems, and adding even more content. But something more important happened. Larian expanded. A publishing office opened in Dublin. 2 more studios followed, one in Russia, one in Canada. Larian was no longer a tiny Belgian team fighting for survival, the underdog. They were now over 50 employees, a fully independent, multi-studio company. And by 2019, Divinity Original Sin had sold over 2.5 million copies. They had done it. They had broken the cycle. They finally had a stable revenue, reliable income, and control over their own destiny.
It's been a fantastic year for Larian. 2013 was great because we had a successful Kickstarter. 2014 was fantastic because we got all your feedback. We released Original Sin, and now it has been recognized as being a okay RPG, and that makes all of us very happy.
But while Original Sin had saved the studio, it still wasn't the dream RPG Swen had imagined since the days of Ultima VII. There were still investors tied to Original Sin, and despite the studio expansion and good sales, they weren't swimming in millions of dollars. It was simply the first real step in his grand plan. The next stage would require something bigger, something shaped not just by Larian, but by its fans.
Hi everybody, my name is Swen Vincke, I'm the creative director and founder at Larian Studios. And today I'm very proud to announce to you our return to Kickstarter with our new RPG, Divinity Original Sin 2.
In August 2015, Larian Studios unveiled their most ambitious project yet, a sequel designed to take everything the first game did well and push it further. The core pillars were clear: a stronger, more gripping story, deeper writing, memorable origin characters, and even more expressive turn-based combat. A truly systemic RPG from every angle. Larian had the funds to build a full feature-rich RPG, but Kickstarter offered something more: the power to dream bigger.
Divinity Original Sin 2 is going to be a fantastic game, but it's also a very ambitious game, and that's why we're returning to Kickstarter. We would like to maximize the amount of things that you can do in the game. Now, we already have a budget in place thanks to the success of the original game, but all of the things that I've been talking about can be taken that much further.
The goal this time was a modest $500,000, and in less than a day,
We started the Kickstarter for Divinity Original Sin 2 this morning at 6 o'clock, a time at which nobody expected that less than 12 hours later we would already have reached our goal.
From 12 days to 12 hours, a clear sign of the passionate fanbase Larian had carefully built. The campaign didn't just succeed, it doubled its goal, then tripled it, eventually raising over $2 million. Every stretch goal smashed, some even before they were formally announced. By September 2016, Original Sin 2 entered Steam Early Access, and immediately reaching very positive to overwhelmingly positive ratings. Just like the first game, community feedback became part of its DNA. Despite the growing hype, the awards, the sudden attention, Larian stayed grounded, humble, focused on the craft, on the love and the fun of making video games. But behind the scenes, something much bigger was happening. Larian was already plotting the next leap forward, something that could break the AAA ceiling entirely. To do that, Swen believed he needed a legendary IP. A world on the scale of Ultima, Fallout, or a universe beloved by millions of tabletop players. Dungeons & Dragons, Baldur's Gate. BioWare's Baldur's Gate games were foundational RPGs. An RPG they held a close connection back in the late 90s. But BioWare had long since moved on. After Dragon Age Origins, their style drifted further and further away from the classic RPG roots. Larian was the perfect developer to pick up the reins, and so Swen approached Wizards of the Coast. I went to them after Divinity Original Sin, and I tried to convince them back then, but they said we were a bit too green. Larian was rejected, not experienced enough, not big enough, not ready. But Swen didn't take it as a failure, he took it as a promise, a challenge, a door that might open someday.
So, update! Still no electricity. We moved our servers to the apartment of Farang. Unfortunately, the Steam uploader PC on which everything is to upload the build to Steam doesn't boot anymore, so it's really going well today. But we'll find solutions. Our friends in Quebec are waking up, and so they will be able to help us.
On September 14, 2017, through a power cut, Original Sin 2 managed to go live on Steam. And not just live, but with a record-setting launch. 50,000, 70,000, 85,000, and eventually near 100,000 concurrent players. Original Sin 2 was the game that cemented Larian Studios as a global RPG powerhouse. While it wasn't perfect, the final act famously needed work. The definitive edition a year later polished the experience into what many consider one of the greatest RPGs ever made. This was the real turning point. By 2017, Larian had grown to around 150 developers. For the first time, they had created a major RPG entirely independently. No publishers, no creative interference, not even outside investors. And the sales numbers were staggering. 1 million copies sold in just 2 months. Over 7.5 million copies sold by 2022. The success allowed Larian to expand even further. Even Tencent took notice of the talent, acquiring a 30% stake through preference shares. But despite the investment, Swen retained full creative control. Now, Larian finally had the talent, the stability, and the resources to pursue a project on a scale they had only dreamed of. The kind of RPG Swen had been chasing since the day he played Ultima VII, a culmination of decades of passion, risk, and hard-earned success.
Somewhere in the future lies a really good game, so that's the one I'd like to make. And that's probably the one I would like the studio to be measured by, but we haven't made it yet.
I know you want to make the perfect game, but this is not the way. This is the way. Behold, the secret sauce of Dungeons and Dragons!
But wait a minute, hadn't they been rejected for the Baldur's Gate IP? Well, back in August 2017, before the release of Original Sin 2, it had grown so impressive that Wizards of the Coast finally made the call. They were willing to offer Larian the deal to make Baldur's Gate 3. It was everything Swen had wanted for years. A legendary IP, a global audience, all with AAA production values, but the soul of an indie, without bureaucracy, publishers, or quarterly pressures.
We are going to be sharing our development progress in videos like this throughout development, just like we did for Divinity Original Sin 2. You'll see us show you new features, you'll see us react to your feedback with adaptations to those features, and like this, slowly but surely, we will evolve Baldur's Gate 3 into the bestest and biggest RPG that Larian Studios has ever made.
The pillars of Baldur's Gate 3 were set: a big, grand adventure, faithful to D&D lore, true player agency, over-delivery, built on top of Larian's existing design values, freedom, systems, interactivity, and consequences. The 2019 announcement trailer hit over 2 million views in days. The return of Baldur's Gate, modernized but true to its roots, sent hype into overdrive. But ambition has a cost. Again. Larian had never made a game on this scale before. They had never produced cinematic dialogue, no motion capture pipelines. Their previous games were largely text-based and voice-acted. So the studio had to expand, again, and rapidly. New tech, new pipeline, new people. By the height of development, Larian grew to over 400 developers, spanning 6 studios worldwide, a footprint rivaling the biggest AAA companies in the industry. The studio even cancelled a Divinity project, Fallen Heroes, to commit everything to Baldur's Gate 3. At the time, Larian was confident, maybe a little bit too confident.
Bon, so you've seen a lot of things today, like really a lot. I hope you are as excited about Gustav as I am. When you add the gameplay on top of everything that you've seen, then you can easily see that if we manage to pull all this off, we're going to have like the RPG of the decade.
Yet the game kept growing and growing and growing. More cinematics, more branching paths, more motion capture, more rewriting, more iteration.
That's why I've decided to launch OnlyFans, your #1 source for exclusive, unrated, vampire spawn content.
Over 1.5 million words of dialogue, over 150 hours of cutscenes. The sheer size of the game became a problem. Finishing it on time seemed impossible, and the budget, despite Larian's size, was becoming daunting. But one thing never changed. Quality would never, ever be sacrificed again.
Consider your predicament. 1 skull, 2 tenants, and no solution in sight. I could fix it all, like that. Try to cure yourself, shop around, beg, borrow, and steal. Exhaust every possibility until none are left. And when hope has been whittled down to the very marrow of despair, that's when you'll come knocking on my door.
Just like their previous projects, Baldur's Gate 3 entered early access in October 2020. Player feedback became a crucial part of development, and within a week, the game sold 1 million copies. Something Original Sin took months to achieve. Eventually, early access alone reached over 2.5 million players.
But the biggest thing that came out is obviously it allowed us to course correct. There were mistakes that we were making, and the players were telling us, "This is a mistake. You shouldn't be doing this." There's 100 of us saying it now. In the future, it will be millions of us. So fix it now. And we listened. So we tried to listen and do as much as we can where we think it makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, it's really how do I feel like a player about the game, and you make pretty much. I think if you do it any other way, you will just be paralyzed. You won't be able to do anything. If you're going to try to do it by committee, then it's just going to be the most mediocre of things that you can have. So you have to follow your gut and say, what game do you want to play? And then it actually comes very easy.
Above all, Larian's philosophy, along with the players, was what guided the game to its final form. By mid-2023, Baldur's Gate 3 was ready to ship, but one cloud lingered over the horizon. Starfield, Bethesda's long-awaited sci-fi RPG, was set to dominate September. In a decision that would become ironic in hindsight, Baldur's Gate 3 moved up its launch date, dropping in August instead of September. By the time Baldur's Gate 3 launched, Larian had survived 10 bankruptcy scares, 10 chances or more for this story to end early. Yet, it didn't.
In mere moments, all that you have dreaded will come to pass. When the screaming stops and your mind is gone, the rest, perhaps, is.
Publishers said classic RPGs were dead, turn-based games wouldn't sell at the AAA level or be mainstream again. Larian proved all of them wrong in one game. Nearly 1 million concurrent players on Steam, still holding over 100 players years later. Over 15 million copies sold by 2024, becoming a juggernaut that shook the entire industry. AAA studios felt ashamed. Indies felt terrified. Developers called it an anomaly, an outlier, something not to be expected again. But the truth was, Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. Larian didn't have more money than the biggest publishers or the biggest companies. They didn't have more staff. What they had was process, a philosophy rooted in time, passion, iteration, and refusing to ship a game before it was ready, before it had reached the quality that they aimed for.
A game like Baldur's Gate 3 isn't possible if you don't have an incredible team working on it. And the team at Larian spent their hearts and souls for 6 years on this game.
From Professor Deep in Light Wars to gambling games built to just make a payroll to Divinity, Larian Studios had become the definitive RPG studio of the modern era. And in a poetic twist, the magic once associated with early BioWare now seemed to live inside Larian, a spiritual torch passed not through a handshake, but through dedication, stubbornness, and survival. Because no matter the odds, he believed one day he could finally build the dream RPG he had imagined since Ultima VII, a game without compromise.
The Oracle told me that the game of the year 2025 was going to be made by a studio who found the formula to make it up here on stage. It's stupidly simple, but somehow it keeps on getting lost. Studio made their game because they wanted to make a game that they wanted to play themselves. They created it because it hadn't been created before. They didn't make it to increase market share. They didn't make it to serve as a brand. They didn't have to meet arbitrary sales targets or fear being laid off if they didn't meet those targets. And furthermore, the people in charge forbade them from cramming the game with anything whose only purpose was to increase revenue and didn't serve the game design. They didn't treat their developers like numbers on a spreadsheet. They didn't treat their players as users to exploit. And they didn't make decisions they knew were short-sighted and function of a bonus or politics. They knew that if you put the game and the team first, the revenue will follow. They were driven by idealism and wanted players to have fun,
And they realized that if the developers didn't have fun, nobody was going to have any fun. They understood the value of respect, that if they treated their developers and players well, those same developers and players would forgive them when things didn't go as planned. But above all, they cared about their game, because they loved games. It's really that simple, said the Oracle.
And prophetically. But here's the twist. Baldur's Gate 3, despite everything, still isn't the RPG he dreamed of. Not the one meant to dwarf them all. Not the final form of Larian's vision. Larian has opened even more studios. 2 new RPGs are in development, and according to Swen, even all of their new technology and expertise still isn't enough. This next project won't be the one either. It will be another step, another evolution, another climb up the mountain. That is Larian Studios, the underdog that refused to die, a studio that refused to compromise, a studio still chasing the impossible RPG and somehow getting closer every time.